World War I. World War I started due to tensions among powerful nations in Europe, including Germany and Austria-Hungary. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary sparked the war. Countries formed alliances, leading to widespread involvement. The war saw new weapons like tanks and poison gas, causing massive casualties. Battles raged across Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. The war ended with the defeat of Germany and its allies, resulting in around 40 million deaths. The Treaty of Versailles was signed, imposing harsh penalties on Germany, which contributed to future conflicts. World War II. This war began when Germany, led by Adolf Hitler, invaded Poland, triggering responses from other nations. Allied powers, including the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union, fought against the Axis powers, primarily Germany, Italy, and Japan. The war saw widespread use of tanks, aircraft, and naval forces. The Holocaust, a genocide targeting Jews and other groups, occurred during this time. The war ended with the Allied victory after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The aftermath led to the establishment of the United Nations and the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. It resulted in the deaths of over 75 million people. American Civil War. The American Civil War took place between the northern states and the southern states. It was primarily fought over issues of slavery, states' rights, and the preservation of the Union. Major events included the Battle of Gettysburg and Sherman's March to the Sea. President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation declared slaves in Confederate-held territory free. The war ended with the surrender of the Confederacy, leading to the abolition of slavery in the United States. It left over 1 million people dead. Vietnam War. This war occurred between North Vietnam, supported by communist allies such as the Soviet Union and China, and South Vietnam, supported by the United States and other anti-communist countries. It stemmed from Vietnam's desire for independence from French colonial rule. The United States became involved to prevent the spread of communism, fearing the domino effect in Southeast Asia. The war ended with the fall of Saigon to North Vietnamese forces in 1975, leading to the reunification of Vietnam under communist control. It resulted in the deaths of 3 million people. Korean War. It took place on the Korean Peninsula between North Korea, supported by China and the Soviet Union, and South Korea, supported by the United Nations, primarily the United States. It started when North Korea invaded South Korea, aiming to unify the peninsula under communist rule. The United Nations intervened to support South Korea. The war ended in an armistice agreement rather than a peace treaty, leaving Korea divided. It resulted in the deaths of over 5 million people. Peloponnesian War. The Peloponnesian War was fought between Athens and its allies, known as the Delian League, and Sparta and its allies, known as the Peloponnesian League. It was a conflict for dominance in ancient Greece. Athens, with its powerful navy, controlled the sea, while Sparta, with its formidable army, dominated the land. Athens suffered a devastating blow with the plague, which killed many of its citizens, including its leader Pericles. The war ended with the defeat of Athens and the dismantling of its empire, leading to the rise of Sparta as the dominant power in Greece. Over 20,000 Greeks died. Napoleonic Wars. These wars were a series of conflicts fought between France, led by Napoleon Bonaparte, and other European powers. The wars included famous battles such as Austerlitz, Borodino, and Waterloo. The wars ended with Napoleon's defeat at the Battle of Waterloo and his exile to the island of St. Helena. The death toll was 7 million. 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War was a conflict fought in Central Europe, mainly in the Holy Roman Empire. It began as a religious war between Protestants and Catholics, but evolved into a struggle for power and territory among European states. It ended with the Peace of Westphalia, which established the principle of state sovereignty and religious tolerance in Europe. Over 8 million people were killed. Crusades. The Crusades were a series of religious wars sanctioned by the Latin Church in the medieval period, primarily aimed at recapturing the Holy Land from Muslim control. Led by European knights and nobles, the Crusaders embarked on military campaigns to Jerusalem and other key locations in the Levant. While some crusades were successful in capturing territory temporarily, others ended in failure. Approximately 2 million people died during this period. Mongol Conquests. These conquests were a series of military campaigns led by the Mongol Empire under leaders like Genghis Khan and his successors. Beginning with Genghis Khan's unification of the Mongol tribes, the conquests expanded rapidly across Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. The Mongols conquered vast territories, including China, Persia, Russia, and parts of Eastern Europe. The Mongol Empire was the largest contiguous land empire in history. It resulted in the deaths of approximately 60 to 70 million people. War of the Roses. This was a series of civil wars fought in England. It was primarily a dynastic conflict between two rival branches of the royal house of Plantagenet. The House of Lancaster, symbolized by a red rose, and the House of York, symbolized by a white rose. The wars were fueled by disputes over the throne and claims to legitimacy. The conflict ended with the victory of Henry Tudor, representing the Lancastrian faction, at the Battle of Bosworth Field. He became King Henry VII. Over 100,000 people died as a result of this war. Iran-Iraq War. This war was one of the longest conventional wars of the 20th century. It was fought between Iran, led by Ayatollah Khomeini's Islamic Republic, and Iraq, led by President Saddam Hussein. The war began with Iraq's invasion of Iran, triggered by territorial disputes and fears of Iraq's rising Shia population. Despite initial Iraqi advances, the war reached a stalemate, with heavy casualties on both sides. It ended with a United Nations-brokered ceasefire in 1988, restoring pre-war borders. This war resulted in the deaths of 500,000 people. Spanish Civil War. The Spanish Civil War was fought between the Republican government and the nationalist rebels, led by General Francisco Franco and supported by conservative forces. The conflict began with a military coup against the democratically elected Republican government. The war saw intense battles across Spain, including the Siege of Madrid and the bombing of Guernica. The nationalists emerged victorious in 1939, leading to Franco's authoritarian rule until his death in 1975. Approximately 500,000 people died during the conflict. The War of 1812. This war was fought between the United States and Great Britain. It was primarily caused by British restrictions on American trade, the impressment of American sailors into the British Navy, and American territorial expansionism. The war saw significant battles such as the Battle of Lake Erie and the burning of Washington, D.C., including the White House and the Capitol by British forces. The war ended with the signing of the Treaty of Ghent in 1814, restoring pre-war borders and resolving many of the disputes that had led to the conflict. Approximately 20,000 people were killed during the war. The Persian Gulf War. Also known as the Gulf War, this conflict began when Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein, invaded and occupied Kuwait. The war saw a coalition of countries, primarily led by the United States, launch a military campaign to liberate Kuwait and restore its sovereignty. Operation Desert Storm involved extensive airstrikes and a ground offensive, which swiftly expelled Iraqi forces from Kuwait. The war ended with a ceasefire agreement in 1991, leaving Saddam Hussein in power in Iraq, but under strict international sanctions and scrutiny. Approximately 100,000 people were killed during the conflict. The Falklands War. This conflict was fought between Argentina and the United Kingdom over the sovereignty of the Falkland Islands, a British overseas territory in the South Atlantic. The war began when Argentina invaded and occupied the Falklands and South Georgia, prompting a British military response. The conflict saw naval battles, airstrikes, and ground combat. The war ended with the Argentine surrender and the restoration of British control over the islands. Over 1,000 people lost their lives during the conflict. The Arab-Israeli Wars. The Arab-Israeli Wars refer to a series of conflicts between Israel and various Arab states, primarily surrounding the establishment and expansion of the State of Israel in the 20th century. These wars were driven by disputes over territory, borders, and the rights of Palestinian refugees, as well as broader geopolitical tensions in the Middle East. They saw major battles, including the capture of Jerusalem in 1967 and the Egyptian crossing of the Suez Canal in 1973. The conflict continues to this day, with over 34,000 innocent people killed between 2023 and 2024. The Rwandan Genocide. This was a tragic event that occurred in Rwanda, a small country in Central Africa. It was a targeted campaign of violence against the Tutsi ethnic group by members of the Hutu majority government and extremist militias. Over approximately 100 days, an estimated 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus were brutally killed, often with machetes and other crude weapons. The international community largely failed to intervene to stop the genocide, despite clear warnings and pleas for assistance from within Rwanda. The War of the Triple Alliance. Also known as the Paraguayan War, this conflict was fought between Paraguay and a coalition of Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay. The war began when Paraguay's leader, Francisco Solano Lopez, sought to expand his territory and influence in the region. The war ended with the defeat of Paraguay and the signing of the Treaty of Asunción in 1870. Paraguay lost significant territory and was forced to pay reparations to the victorious Allies. Over 500,000 people lost their lives during the war. The Crimean War. The Crimean War involved Russia on one side and an alliance of the Ottoman Empire, France, Britain, and Sardinia on the other. The war was fought over control of territories in the Black Sea region, particularly the Crimean Peninsula. The conflict was characterized by outdated military tactics, inadequate medical care, and harsh conditions, resulting in 500,000 deaths. The war ended with the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1856, which confirmed Russia's loss of influence in the Black Sea. The Sino-Japanese War. This war occurred between China and Japan from 1894 to 1895. It was fought for control of Korea and influence in East Asia. The war began with the Donghak Rebellion in Korea, leading to conflict between China and Japan over their respective interests in the region. The Treaty of Shimonoseki ended the war, resulting in China ceding Taiwan and other territories to Japan, as well as granting Korea independence from Chinese influence. About 21 million people were killed during this conflict. The Russo-Japanese War. The Russo-Japanese War was fought between the Russian Empire and the Empire of Japan. The conflict arose over competing imperial interests in Northeast Asia, particularly in Manchuria and Korea. The war began with a surprise attack by Japan on the Russian naval fleet at Port Arthur, leading to a series of battles. The war ended with the signing of the Treaty of Portsmouth, brokered by the United States, which recognized Japan's control over Korea and its influence in Manchuria, as well as granting Japan territorial concessions from Russia. It's estimated that around 200,000 people were killed in this war. The War of the Austrian Succession. This war was a conflict fought in Europe and North America. It began when Maria Theresa ascended to the throne of the Habsburg monarchy, triggering disputes over her inheritance. The war saw fighting between Austria and its allies, including Britain and the Dutch Republic, against France and its allies, including Prussia and Spain. The war ended with the signing of the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, which confirmed Maria Theresa's rule over the Habsburg territories, but left many territorial disputes unresolved. Around 300,000 people were killed. The War of Independence. This war refers to the American Revolutionary War, fought between Great Britain and 13 of its North American colonies, which declared themselves independent as the United States of America. The war arose from growing tensions over issues such as taxation without representation and British colonial policies. The conflict ended with the Treaty of Paris, which recognized the independence of the United States and established its borders. Over 8,000 people died. If you enjoyed this video, check out our other videos and hit that subscribe button. See you next time.